You've all heard of the story of the Christmas Truce in the First World War. This is a Christmas truce in the Second World War. It's one that I am emotionally attached to because it happened in the Battle of the Bulge. The Battle of the Bulge was Hitler's last attempt to destroy the American army. And he tried a surprise attack that surprised us and pushed our lines way back. And it was about Christmas time that it happened. And this is a story that happened to a friend of mine, actually a cousin of mine, my cousin Joe. My cousin Joe, like myself, raised in the Chicago area, went down south, met Laura, a Southern belle. They fell in love and married, and he shipped out. Joe found himself in this very battle, and a grenade went off in front of him, shattering his sight and scattering fragments all through his body. He had to call his new wife and tell her that he had lost his sight. He said, "We've been married only a very short time, and if you want out, I'll understand." She would have no part of that. And when I went to his funeral in Tuscaloosa about 20 years ago, Laura and their 2 sons were there. This is the story that happened during that battle, as told by Fritz Venken. Fritz was 12 years old. He and his mother were in a cabin in the woods trying to avoid the war, but it came to them. I will just read it as it was printed in the Reader's Digest about 1973. It's called Truce in the Forest. It was Christmas Eve, and the last desperate German offensive raged around our tiny cabin. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door. When we heard the knock on our door that Christmas Eve in 1944, neither Mother nor I had the slightest inkling of the quiet miracle that lay in store for us. I was 12 then, and we were living in a small cottage in the Hütgen forest near the German-Belgian border. Father had stayed at that cottage on hunting weekends before the war. When Allied bombers partly destroyed our hometown of Aachen, he sent us to live there. He had been ordered into the Civil Defense Fire Guard in the border town of Manchow, 4 miles away. "You'll be safe in the woods," he had told me. "Take care of Mother. Now you're the man of the family." But 9 days before Christmas, Field Marshal von Rundstedt had launched the last desperate German offensive of the war, and now, as I went to the door, the Battle of the Bulge was raging all around us. We heard the incessant booming of field guns. Planes soared continuously overhead. At night, searchlights stabbed through the darkness. Thousands of Allied and German soldiers were fighting and dying nearby. When the first knock came, Mother quickly blew out the candles. Then, as I went to answer it, she stepped ahead of me and pushed open the door. Outside, like phantoms against the snow-clad trees, stood 2 steel-helmeted men. One of them spoke to Mother in a language we did not understand, pointing to a third man lying in the snow. She realized before I did that these were American soldiers, enemies. Mother stood silent, motionless, her hand on my shoulder. They were armed and could have forced their entrance, but they stood there and asked with their eyes, and the wounded man seemed more dead than alive. "Kommt rein," Mother said finally. "Come in." The soldiers carried their comrade inside and stretched him out on my bed. None of them understood German. Mother tried French, and one of the soldiers could converse in that language. As Mother went to look after the wounded man, she said to me, "The fingers of those two are numb. Take off their jackets and boots and bring in a bucket of snow." Soon I was rubbing their blue feet with snow. We learned that the stocky, dark-haired fellow was Jim. His friend, tall and slender, was Robin. Harry, the wounded one, was now sleeping on my bed, his face as white as the snow outside. They'd lost their battalion and wandered in the forest for 3 days looking for the Americans, hiding from the Germans. They hadn't shaved, but still, without their heavy coats, they looked merely like big boys. And that was the way Mother began to treat them. Now Mother said to me, "Go get Herman and bring 6 potatoes." This was a serious departure from the pre-Christmas plans. Herman was a plump rooster named after portly Hermann Göring, Hitler's number 2 man, for whom Mother had little affection, that we had been fattening for weeks in the hope that Father would be home for Christmas. But some hours before, it was obvious that Father would not make it. Mother had decided that Herman should live a few more days, in case Father could get home for New Year's. Now she changed her mind again, and Herman served a more immediate purpose. While Jim and I helped with the cooking, Robin took care of Harry. He had a bullet through his upper leg and had almost bled to death. Mother tore a bedsheet into long strips for bandages. Soon the tempting smell of roast chicken permeated our room. I was sitting at the table when once again there came a knock at the door. Expecting to find more lost Americans, I opened the door without hesitation. There stood 4 soldiers wearing uniforms, quite familiar to me after 5 years of war. They were Wehrmacht, Germans. I was paralyzed with fear. Although still a child, I knew the harsh law. Sheltering enemy soldiers constituted high treason. We could all be shot. Mother was frightened too. Her face was white. But she stepped outside and said quietly, "Fröhliche Weihnachten." The soldiers wished her a Merry Christmas too. "We have lost our regiment and would like to wait for daylight," explained the corporal. "Can we rest there?" "Of course," Mother replied, with a calmness born of panic. "You can also have a fine warm meal and eat till the pot is empty." The Germans smiled as they sniffed the aroma through the half-open door. "But," Mother added firmly, "we have 3 other guests, whom you may not consider friends." Now her voice was suddenly sterner than I'd ever heard it before. "This is Christmas Eve, and there will be no shooting here." "Who's inside?" the corporal demanded. "Amerikaner?" Mother looked at each frost-chilled face. "Listen," she said slowly, "you could be my sons, and so could they in there. A boy with a gunshot wound fighting for his life, and his 2 friends, lost like you, just as hungry and exhausted as you are. This one night," she turned to the corporal and raised her voice a little, "this Christmas light, let us forget about killing." The corporal stared at her. There were 2 or 3 endless seconds of silence. Then Mother put an end to the indecision. "Enough talking," she ordered, and clapping her hands sharply, "Please put your weapons here on the woodpile and hurry up before the others eat the dinner." Dazedly, the 4 soldiers placed their arms on the pile of firewood just inside the door, 3 carbines, a light machine gun, and 2 bazookas. Meanwhile, Mother was speaking French rapidly to Jim. He said something in English, and to my amazement, I saw the American boys, too, turn their weapons over to Mother. Now, as the Germans and Americans tensely rubbed elbows in the small room, Mother was really on her mettle. Never losing her smile, she tried to find a seat for everyone. We had only 3 chairs, but Mother's big bed allowed us to put 2 newcomers side by side with Jim and Robin. The strained atmosphere was tenable, but Mother went on preparing dinner. But Herman wasn't going to get any bigger, and now there were 4 more mouths to feed. Quick, she whispered to me. Get more potatoes and some oats. The boys are hungry, and a starving man is an angry one. While foraging in the storage room, I heard Harry moan. When I returned, one of the Germans had put on his glasses and inspected Harry's wound. Do you belong to the medical corps? Mother asked. No, he answered, but I studied medicine at Heidelberg until a few months ago. Thanks to the cold, he told the Americans, in what sounded like pretty good English. Harry's wound hadn't become infected. He is suffering from severe loss of blood, he explained to Mother. What he needs is rest and nourishment. Relaxation was now beginning to replace suspicion. Even to me, all the soldiers looked very young as we sat together. Heinz and Willie, both from Cologne, were 16. Their German corporal at 23 was the oldest of them all. From his food bag, he drew out a bottle of red wine, and Heinz managed to find a loaf of rye bread. Mother cut that into small pieces to be served with the dinner. Half the wine, however, was put away for the wounded boy. Then Mother said grace. I noticed that there were tears in her eyes. She said the old familiar words, "Come here, Jesus. Be our guest." And as I looked around the table, I saw tears too in the eyes of the battle-weary soldiers. Boys again, some from America, some from Germany, all far from home. Just before midnight, Mother went to the doorstep and asked us to join her to look at the Star of Bethlehem. We stood beside her except Harry, who was sleeping. For all of us, during the moment of silence, looking at the brightest star in the heavens, their war was a distant, almost forgotten thing. Our private armistice continued next morning. Harry woke in the early hours and swallowed some broth, and Mother fed him. With the dawn, it was apparent that he was becoming stronger. Mother now made him an invigorating drink from our 1 egg, the rest of the corporal's wine and some sugar. Everyone else had oatmeal. Afterward, 2 poles and Mother's best tablecloth were fashioned into a stretcher for Harry. The German corporal then advised the Americans how to find their way back to their lines. Looking over Jim's map, the corporal pointed out a stream. Continue along this creek, he said, and you will find the First Army rebuilding its forces on its upper course. The medical student relayed the information in English. Why don't we go for Manschau? Jim had the student ask. 9, the corporal explained. We have retaken Manschau. Now Mother gave them all back their weapons. Be careful, boys, she said. I want you to get home someday where you belong. God bless you all. The Germans and American soldiers shook hands. We watched them disappear in opposite directions. When I returned inside, Mother had brought out the old family Bible. I glanced over her shoulder. The book is open to the Christmas story, the birth in the manger and the wise men. Her finger was tracing Matthew 2:21. They departed into their own country another way. When I arrived at the burial site at Joe's funeral, the honor guard was there preparing for their ceremony, and nobody else had arrived yet. I asked them, did you know anything about this fellow that they were honoring? And they said no, they didn't. So I told them about how he was blinded and that he came home and with Laura's help, learning Braille, reel-to-reel tape recorders, and a lot of grit. Joe got himself a college education. He had a degree in social work, and he had a long career of counseling people on how to deal with their disabilities.